Top 10 clinical trials that went horribly wrong. Clinical preliminaries are the main advance in getting a medication supported by the FDA. Without them, nobody would know whether their meds were protected. By far most of the time, these preliminaries work out in a good way, and the medication is endorsed for general use. Yet, now and again, a clinical preliminary turns out badly. Continue to peruse to find out around 10 of these celebrated occurrences that clinical organizations attempt frantically to hide. Read more. 10 Terrible Ideas in Medicine from the Past 100 Years. 10 The University of Minnesota Seroquel Experiment. My child Dan passed on very nearly 5 years prior in a clinical report at the University of Minnesota. An examination he did not have any conclusion for, and an investigation that I attempted fruitlessly to get him out of for a very long time. Ever since her child's inopportune demise, Mary Weiss has been attempting to spread this message to the world. In 2003, her whimsical child, Dan Markingson, was determined to have schizophrenia and conceded to the University of Minnesota Medical Center in Fairview. Not long after, he was placed into a clinical preliminary testing 3 distinct kinds of schizophrenia drugs: Seroquel, Risperdal, and Zyprexa. Rapidly, his everyday 800 mg portions of Seroquel began to deteriorate his delusions. In reaction, his mom wildly sent letters, messages, and called the investigation facilitators to attempt to remove her child from the program. However, the organization prohibited Dan from leaving the investigation, taking steps to place him into a psychological facility on the off chance that he attempted to nonconformist. Weiss was stunned by this until she took in a critical reality about the program. Her child's cooperation was valued at $15,000 to the school. 1. Unable to leave the program, Markingson's hallucinations turned out to be more regrettable until he in the end ended it all by wounding himself to death in the shower. A self-destruction note read, "I went through this experience grinning." Devastated, his mom sued the school, which wouldn't assume liability for its activities. Markingson was one of 5 preliminary subjects to endeavor self-destruction, and one of 2 who prevailing with regards to ending their own lives. 9 French Biotrial tragedy. Family's resentment at France drug preliminary, where 6 kicked the bucket. In January 2016, the French organization Biotrial enlisted 128 sound volunteers to partake in a clinical preliminary of another medication intended to battle tension identified with malignancy and Parkinson's sickness. Affected by little dosages of the medication, the patients revealed no results. In any case, when the portions started to heighten after the main week, issues began to surface. Specifically, 6 of the members got debilitated and were quickly shipped off the ER. One of these patients, a sound man in his late 20s, was announced mind-dead only multi-weeks subsequent to being conceded to the emergency clinic in 14 days in the wake of beginning the preliminary. The 5 different patients stayed in a steady condition, yet specialists anticipate that many will have endured irreversible mind harm and mental handicaps. Even however this was the first run through the medication had been tried on people, the preliminary overseers realized that there were not kidding issues with the medication. One French news source uncovered a pre-preliminary that effectively affected canines, murdering a few and leaving others with mind damage. 2. Yet the preliminary was as yet led on people, and with unpleasant results. 8. The thalidomide trials. The drug thalidomide was first fabricated in Germany, essentially to treat respiratory diseases. Today, numerous individuals think about this medication as a result of its antagonistic consequences for pregnancy. More than 10,000 youngsters brought into the world during the 1960s endured genuine hindrances, like missing appendages and congenital fissures, because of this drug. Unlike different preliminaries on the rundown, the spooky piece of the thalidomide clinical preliminary was that everything went awfully right. During the licensing and endorsement stage, analysts tried the medication on creatures however failed to notice the consequences for their posterity. Since it was difficult to pass on from an excess of the medication, it was considered safe, and it hit the racks in 1956. 3. It was not until 1961 that Australian specialist William McBride found the connection among thalidomide and the deformations. Up to that point, each clinical preliminary arrived at the decision that thalidomide was a protected over-the-counter medication, although 10,000 individuals paid the price. 7 Gene therapy clinical trial. Jesse Gelsinger was 18 when he entered an investigation that tried the well-being of quality treatment in kids with serious hereditary changes in the liver. Like different kids in the examination, he had been brought into the world with a condition considered OTC that kept his liver from disposing of sufficient smelling salts, which the specialists attempted to battle by infusing him with a cool infection. Be that as it may, one high portion of the medication would be Gelsinger's last. On September 17, 1999, his indications immediately spiraled from jaundice, to organ disappointment, to cerebrum death. 4. The FDA dove into this demise and tracked down a couple of shockingly unreliable activities with respect to the heads. To begin with, Gelsinger was in the last gathering of patients, and each gathering before him had endured serious responses to the medication. However, the investigation proceeded. Furthermore, Gelsinger's degrees of smelling salts were high to such an extent that they ought to have excluded him from the preliminary in any case. He was initially planned as a substitute, yet a patient exited, and he was hurriedly remembered for the investigation. 6. Anil Padhi's miracle cancer drug. Padhi saw as blameworthy of examination wrongdoing. All through the 2000s, Anil Padhi was a best-in-class clinical star. He guaranteed malignancy therapies with a 80% fix rate, and clinical experts accepted that his revelations could save 10,000 lives per year. Yet in 2015, this all changed. Padhi was seen as liable of remembering bogus information for an original copy, 9 papers, and an award application, so the consequences of his examinations were voided. One lady who was especially influenced by this falseness was Joyce Schaffner. 5. Patient No. 1. In a July 2008 preliminary done by Padhi. Under the assurance that Padhi's treatment relieved 80% of malignant growths, Schaffner energetically joined the investigation to help fix her bosom disease. She went through an excruciating biopsy, where specialists took tissue tests by embedding a long needle from under her arm and up into her neck. She then, at that point, went through a routine of adriamycin cytoxin, AC, chemotherapy, just to be told 2 years after the fact that the investigation's outcomes had been voided because of Padhi's inclusion. Today, Schaffner doesn't have bosom malignancy, yet she lives with the blood coagulations and diabetes brought about by the AC routine, just as post-horrendous pressure problem coming about because of the preliminary itself. Read more. 10 people with shocking and extreme deformities. 5. Stem cell vision treatment. In January 2017, 3 ladies entered an examination with their vision and left without it. Their ages going from 72 to 88. Each of the 3 of these ladies experienced macular degeneration, an eye sickness firmly identified with advanced age. The patients each paid $5,000 to have the 2 eyes treated with undifferentiated organism treatment, an interaction that was both abnormal and perilous, as indicated by a few ophthalmology experts. 6. Just days after the method, every one of the 3 ladies detailed extreme results, including draining and retinal separation. One patient completely lost her vision, while the other 2 lost most. None of the patients are required to recuperate their sight. Yet, researchers realized that this preliminary had defects all along. As a matter of first importance, the patients were needed to pay for their own methodology, which is an egregious indication of ill-conceived research. Moreover, clinical experts have attempted to delete the historical backdrop of the preliminary. When you visit government records of the preliminary on the web, it just says that the examination was removed before enlistment, which plainly was not the situation. 4. Leukemia CAR-T trial masked surgical error. In July 2016, 3 grown-up leukemia patients kicked the bucket in a preliminary of another cell-level medication by Juno Therapeutics. Nicknamed CAR-T, Juno's new therapy choice should assault the threatening cells until they seem to have vanished. 7. The innovation was a cutting-edge wonder that numerous scientists called the 5th column of malignancy therapy. However, trusts were before long run by the aftereffects of the 2016 study. The reason for death for the 3 patients was expanding in the cerebrum, medicinally known as cerebral edema. Delegates from the supporting clinical organization Juno concede that cerebral edema is fairly regular in patients who have been given CAR-T medicines, as are invulnerable framework responses and expanded neurological toxicity. After the information on the passings had been delivered, Juno's stock fell 27%. Their practices are under FDA survey, and it is hazy whether they will be permitted to proceed with their examinations. 3. New York lidocaine disaster. In 1996, Hoi Yan, Nicole, Wan, a sound sophomore at the University of Rochester, required some pocket cash. So she chose to join, without her folks' consent, for a clinical preliminary that paid $150. 8. The scientists embedded a cylinder down her throat and into her lungs to see the impacts of contamination on her respiratory framework, a typical methodology called a bronchoscopy. But what Nicole didn't know was that they took undeniably more cell tests than initially laid out in the proposition. What's more, as they took more examples from her lungs, they expanded the portion of her sedative, lidocaine, far over the levels supported by the FDA. She was delivered feeling staggeringly powerless and in gigantic measures of agony, and after 2 days was discovered dead. A dissection uncovered that deadly degrees of lidocaine, because of misbehavior in the investigation, had made her heart quit thumping and the remainder of her body to flop alongside it. Second Johns Hopkins asthma trial. Ellen Roche, a specialist at Johns Hopkins Hospital, elected to participate in an asthma preliminary for sound people. The preliminary's objective was to find what system held sound individuals back from fostering the manifestations of asthma, so the specialists instigated a gentle asthmatic response and afterward treated it with hexamethonium. At first, breathing in this medication essentially caused Ms. Roche to foster a hack. Yet, as time advanced, she was put on a ventilator as her lung tissue separated and her kidneys started to fall flat. She kicked the bucket 1 month after the fact, on June 2, 2001. 9. Medical authorities from the preliminary concede that the hexamethonium was either exclusively liable for the subject's ailment or assumed a significant contributory part. To exacerbate the situation, members learned after the preliminary that hexamethonium isn't so much as a FDA-endorsed drug. This reality was excluded from the assent structure, so Johns Hopkins has been compelled to assume full liability for Roch's passing. 1. The Elephant Man trial. Human guinea pigs distorted by Elephant Man drug preliminary recount appendage misfortune awfulness. The most well-known clinical preliminary ever, the Elephant Man trial occurred in London in 2006. The preliminary, which was trying another malignancy therapy called TGN-1412, appeared to be innocuous to the 8 men who participated in it. Clinical experts had guaranteed them that the most noticeably awful side effects would just incorporate a cerebral pain and nausea. But the outcomes were substantially more grisly than that. Soon after they were given the dosages, the entirety of the patients started squirming excruciatingly and vomiting. 10. One of the members lost his fingers and toes, while another needed to have his foot incompletely removed. The preliminary acquired its epithet, the Elephant Man trial, since one member's head ballooned so enormous that his better half prodded him about seeming as though an elephant. No one is totally certain what turned out badly, yet the patients have a couple of thoughts. One proposes that the circumstance of the dose made it risky. Specialists went through an hour and a half gradually infusing creatures with the medication, yet required a simple 6 minutes to infuse it into the human subjects. Another case is that the fundamental creature testing was wrong in light of the fact that as opposed to testing on a bonobo, whose DNA is a 98% match to people, the office cut expenses and utilized a macaque, whose DNA is just a 94% match. These men may never know precisely what turned out badly that portentous day, or what it will keep on importance for their lives.